We're very happy to see here distinguished ambassadors and a lot of very good friends, and also I think other people we don't know so well, but that we share that in common, that these are extremely interesting times and that one has to rethink many things in order to comprehend not only what is going on right now, but the great potential that there is in the time that we live in. First, before anything else, to set the tone, so to speak, we will have a little musical introduction, a Chinese traditional song, the Kāngdìng love song, which is a classical theme of a beautiful young woman and a beautiful young man getting attracted to each other, first simply attracted, and then considering what they can build a future together. And I think this is a very fitting metaphor of what we're going to be discussing today in terms of the Chinese, right now, the attraction, I would say, between China and Europe and the rest of the world in terms of the great future that there is to be built together in a totally new paradigm. So I would like to invite up Michel Rasmussen and Feride Istogu Gillesberg, both vice chairmen of the Danish Schiller Institute, to present this. Before I will introduce Helga Zepp-LaRouche, I will just say something to the format here, that we have a video camera there for the purpose of recording Helga Zepp-LaRouche's speech, so the many people that would like to be here but could not be here can listen to it afterwards. Then we will turn the video camera off. We will record Helga's responses to questions later in the question period, so we simply can transcribe them. But otherwise, what will come after her speech is considered off the record, so people can feel free to speak their minds without having to considering being quoted for this or that. Now, in introducing Helga, it's very difficult because she's simply been involved in so many things over the last half century that it's almost difficult to describe. But one can say that she began her career of the activities she's in right now in 1971, when as a fresh young journalist she came to China and had a chance to see what was then a definitely not developed country. And after she came back home, after being going around the world, joined the LaRouche movement, later married Lyndon LaRouche, and became an international leader in the question of how to create a new paradigm for the world which would give the whole world a chance for real economic development, for a new just world economic order. And in that process, in 1984, she founded the Schiller Institute. Later, with the fall of the Berlin Wall, she became a very active character and arranges conferences, both in Western Europe, Eastern Europe, United States, on using the great potential at that time. Later, when that did not really materialize, she became a driving force in the establishment of the Eurasian land bridge and what she described at many conferences in Europe, in China, other places, as the new Silk Road policy, a policy for development for the whole world. And as you all know, this is now the policy that the Chinese government is carrying out, which is, for that reason, I think the right person we have here today to discuss all of this in light also of the incoming new presidency in the United States. So please welcome Helga Zepp-LaRouche.
Yes, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As Tom already noted, we are living in very, very interesting times. This is actually, I think, a Chinese wish, that people say, I wish that you should live in interesting times. And I think we do, because, we are right now in a complete changing strategic situation, which is characterized by completely different vectors of development. And therefore, it's almost impossible to predict which of these vectors will be the victorious ones. I have an inclination which one that is going to be, but nothing is in safe areas. Nothing is in in an area where you could lay back and say, okay, everything is fine, because it's not. Because you have three fundamentally different dynamics. The first one, which concerns us here in Europe, which is the fact that there is right now a global revolution against the system of globalization underway. And that is not finished, and it will not stop until the causes for this global revolution are remedied. I think the first massive manifestation was the Brexit last June, where Great Britain, a majority of people voted to leave the European Union. The second major manifestation of this was the rejection of Hillary Clinton, and with that also a rejection of the policies of the 16-year US presidency of Bush and Cheney and Obama, because Obama was really the total continuation of the previous policies of Bush and Cheney. It was not the messiahs which many people believed he would be. but you know, we never thought that. As a matter of fact, I remember I wrote an editorial when Obama was speaking in front of 200,000 people in Berlin. I wrote an editorial, Obama the soufflé. You know, a lot of outside, but not much substance. And I also said at that point, which was not very popular, I said, the Germans apparently always need a leader to follow. You know, sometimes he's called Adolf, sometimes he's called Dalai Lama, sometimes he's called Gorby, now he's called Barack, and that was not popular, but we had looked at Obama more closely, and I think we turned out to be right. If you look at the continuation of the wars in the Middle East and the killing policy of the drones and similar things. Now, I want to also remember people, or remind people, that my husband, Lyndon LaRouche, made a very famous international webcast in, I think it was July 2007, which was 1 week before the secondary mortgage crisis in the United States erupted, where he said, globalization is finished, this is the beginning of a global crisis which will not stop. And again, many people in disbelief said, well, 1 week later you had the mortgage crisis in the US breaking out, you had the collapse of this major bridge, which he also had predicted. He said there will be a collapse of infrastructure, and 1 week later the bridge, I think it was in Minnesota or somewhere in one of these states, broke down. So this collapse of globalization, I will talk about in a little while, but you know, it is basically the unifying element between the Brexit, the Trump vote, and now the no to the referendum in Italy, is naturally that if you have a system of government where too many people are left behind, where the gap between rich and poor is becoming unbearably wide, then, you know, eventually such revolts occur. So this is one dynamic, which is obviously affecting the transatlantic sector. But then you have a more happy dynamic, which is the New Silk Road Belt and Road Initiative initiated by China 3 years ago, which is already now 12 times larger than the Marshall Plan, which led to the reconstruction of the post-war Germany and other countries. And it already involves 100 countries and large international institutions. It involves already the majority of mankind, 4.4 billion people, and it is growing very, very rapidly. It has the potential to eventually be the victorious one, because it is based on the idea of a win-win cooperation where every country can participate to its own benefit and the benefit of all others. And then naturally the most newest third vector of development, where it is completely undecided yet where it will go, but nevertheless it is a completely new thing, is the election of Donald Trump to be the next president of the United States. Now, up to the present day, the neocon-dominated media in the transatlantic sector is really not grappling with the situation that there is a new US president. I mean, they are still in a pre-election mode, unbelievable slanders and spins. You know, as a matter of fact, when the election campaign was underway, I talked with an American who was in the United States watching Trump's speeches and, you know, the reaction of the population. And then he came to Europe and he said, the media here are portraying this in such a wrong way. I mean, I'm not defending the manners of Mr. Trump. Do not misunderstand me. You know, the famous German Baron von Qínggē, who developed the code of behavior of civilized people, would probably turn in his grave about some of the things Trump would do. But, you know, there is a difference between substance and, you know, admittedly questionable behavior. Now, what Trump did, which I think is the most important, the moment he was elected, he got on the telephone and he talked to President Putin and President Xi Jinping, and all sides afterwards confirmed that the intention was to normalize and improve the relationship between the United States and Russia and the United States and China. And I think this, for any person who is in their right mind, is the most important. Because, you know, if Hillary Clinton would have been elected, we would be on a short road to a global confrontation, because her plans to establish a no-fly zone over Syria implied the immediate possibility of this conflict going completely out of control, leading to a global confrontation. So naturally, this is not yet completely remedied, because we have now the 12th of December, and it is still, I would say, 5 or 6 weeks until Trump gets into the White House, and you can see very clearly that Obama is trying to create as much chaos on the way out of the White House as he possibly can. He just made a decree where he basically ordered the arming of the rebels in Syria, including providing them with so-called man-pads, that is, man-held artillery which can shoot down planes, which, you know, could really also shoot down American planes or other planes. So it's a very incredible thing, and I think it's very important that Trump is completely opposed to this, and so is Tulsi Gabbard, who is a very young, talented congresswoman from Hawaii, who introduced a bill in reaction to this Obama. She's from the Democratic Party, but she introduced a bill prohibiting arms sales to such rebel groups, and is leading a bipartisan effort to this effect. Now, obviously, there is also the effort by the neocons to ruin the relationship with Russia and China in the remaining period as much as possible. For example, the Neocon Heritage Foundation in the United States, they sent a delegation in October to Taiwan. This was Ed Faulner and Stephen Yates, who used to be the national security aide to Dick Cheney at the time, and Reince Priebus, the new member of the Trump team. They went to Taiwan, and this was coordinated with the effort by the Taiwanese government to use the incoming new presidency to change the one China policy. So they had hired 3 lobbyists, Bob Dole, Richard Gephardt, and Tom Daschle, to get access to the president-elect and get a policy change. And it was that combination of heritage plus lobbyist people who arranged the phone call of the Taiwanese President Tsai with Trump, congratulating Trump for his election. And Trump took the phone call, and this was made then a big affair by the international media, because, you know, this violated the one China policy and so forth. The Chinese government took a very laid-back attitude. They say this was the fault of President Tsai, and they didn't blame so much Trump. But obviously such maneuvers are taking place, but they are probably offset by the fact that Trump appointed the next US ambassador to China to be Gary Branstad, who used to be the governor of Iowa, and who is a personal friend of President Xi Jinping since 1985, when Xi Jinping came for the first time to Iowa to do some farm trading deals and so forth. So he would, in all likelihood, be completely opposed against any tendency to have a trade war with China or sanctions, and will insist on good relations. Now, if you look at the other appointments which are known so far in the new Trump team, they are all interesting people because most of them are explicitly anti-neocon. They are very conservative, but that's not the same thing like neocon. In the same way like the Nazis were not conservatives, I mean, there's a difference between such things. And one of them, for example, General Flynn, who is now the new National Security Advisor of Trump, he was kicked out of the position of CENTCOM commander in 2012 because he had criticized Obama for arming the different terrorist groups, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra. ISIS was not existing at that point yet. But he said that these groups intend to build an Islamic state, they intend to build a caliphate, and this is the intention of Obama to do that in order to topple the legitimate elected governments, which was the truth, and he was kicked out for that reason. So he's now the National Security Advisor of Trump. Then also General Mattis, a four-star general who is known to be completely against the wars for regime change purposes, like Flynn, and General Kelly, and all of them share the idea that the United States should stop intervening in the affairs of other countries, toppling regimes, making color revolutions, and similar things. Now, Trump, about 2 weeks ago, made a speech in Cincinnati where he laid out his foreign policy approach, that he said we should absolutely stop to have these foreign wars. We should stop. I'm sorry. We should stop to have these wars against regimes about which we know nothing, which only leads to chaos, and we should instead build friendships with old friends and build new friendships. Then another appointment which is causing a big freak out on the neocon side is the appointment of Rex Tillerson, who is the head of ExxonMobil, who is supposed to become the new Secretary of State. And he just got the most important friendship award by President Putin, friendship award with Russia. So definitely there are some interesting appointments. There are also some problematic appointments, like 3 or 4 members of Goldman Sachs are in the economic team. Now we have to see how that plays out, because in the worst case it's a continuation of Wall Street policies. In the best case, it's like Franklin D. Roosevelt appointed Joe Kennedy, who was a member of the banking lobbyist, but he got him to implement Glass-Steagall, because also you could say it needs one to know one, so you need one to know the business. So, but I don't want to make a prediction on that, because Goldman Sachs is also Mario Draghi and such people. Now, Obama is now throwing another hand grenade in the situation by having appointed CIA chief Klepper to investigate that Russia supposedly stole the US election by having cyber attacks against Hillary, against DNC, Democratic National Committee, and so forth and so on. Now, this is a big thing. Now all the papers are saying Russia intervened in the US election. All the German papers are now repeating the same thing, and they're saying, oh, we have now to be so concerned that Russia will meddle in the upcoming federal election in Germany next year. But Trump already denounced that and said this is a big lie. It is the same kind of lie like the weapons of mass destruction against Iraq. And also there was a hearing last week in Congress where the FBI testified that there is absolutely no evidence for Russian involvement in these attacks. Trump said these attacks could have come from any place, from New Jersey or, any place. So, and also, as the president of South Korea just is being impeached, the South Korean defense minister announced that the deployment of the THAAD missiles, which are regarded by Russia and China as a strategic threat, the deployment of these missiles is being sped up, which is not a good development at all. Now, what is the perspective, what we want to do? Because we are not just looking at Trump, analyzing it in a contemplative way, but we have a very active approach. We want the United States to join the new Silk Road dynamic because, if you have been recently in the United States is in urgent need of infrastructure. I mean, if you drive over the highway from Washington to New York, there are potholes which are really so big that don't drive a small car because you can just vanish in them, and don't try to go with a fast train system in the United States because there is none. Only tiny Amtrak, but you can't really say that this is anything. So we want the United States to have an infrastructure program, which Trump already announced. He said he wants to build an infrastructure program of $1 trillion investment in the next years and make the infrastructure in the United States the most modern in the world. Now that's quite a mouthful, because if he has to compete with the Chinese infrastructure program, which is unbelievably modern and fast growing, China has built until 2014 20,000 kilometer fast train system, and the Chinese fast trains are excellent. They're fast, they're smooth, they're quiet, and till the year 2020 China will have built 50,000 kilometers fast train system connecting every large city in China with such a system. So Trump has quite a lot to do, but obviously that if this infrastructure program in the United States would be connected via the Bering Strait and via Latin America to the new Silk Road efforts, you could have a completely different paradigm in a very short period of time. And one can almost be certain that the new US Ambassador Branstad will advertise that the United States join the AIIB, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Now, this is very urgent because the United States is in a terrible crisis. The crisis in the United States is much worse than people in Europe normally know. The National Center for Health Statistics just put out new figures about an increase in the death rate of people in the United States. For example, from 2014 to 2015, the death rate in the United States went up. I mean, that is really unbelievable, because normally in the industrialized world, the death rate would continuously fall. Longevity would get longer. But here, from 8 from the 10 major diseases, the death rate increased. The average life expectancy of men decreased from 76.5 to 76.3. That is, 0.2% shrinkage, and for women from 81.3 to 81.2 by 0.1 year. So it's, since life expectancy is the best indicator for the well-being of people. You know, this is really unbelievable. And in the 16 years of the Obama and Bush administration, the suicide rate quadrupled in all age groups for the reasons of drug addiction, alcoholism, depression, especially white women in rural areas, you know, where you would think, you know, this is a hygge environment, but not so in the United States. There is no hygge in the United States. Now, obviously, this is the result of globalization, because, you know, the Wall Street people became richer and richer, but the so-called Dust Belt in the United States, those states which previously were industrialized, where Hillary Clinton was too arrogant to even visit in the election campaign because she thought she had these states in her pocket, but these were the states who voted against her. But, you know, in Europe the situation is not any better, at least in parts of Europe. As a result of the Troika policy, you have now an impoverishment of 45% of the Greek population. 45% of people in Greece are living below the poverty line. Now that is no good. In Italy, you have now an unemployment rate of estimated, even by the EU Commission, 23% average, but 50% of the youth, every second youth has no job and no chance to go to higher education, which means they have no future. And this is even 65% in Calabria, Sardinia, Sicily, despite the fact that every year 100,000 people are leaving the Mezzogiorno because they have no choice. So there is a tremendous brain drain, and every one person in 4 in Italy are regarded to be poor, and the health system has completely collapsed, as it has done in Greece. So this is why the people voted no to the referendum of Renzi just a good week ago, because what this referendum was supposed to do is to streamline the Italian constitution according to the guidelines of the European Union, and in that way fulfill the requirements of JP Morgan, which had already put out a study some years ago where they said some of these European constitutions should be changed. They have been written in the post-war period. They are providing too much protection for labor. They should be rewritten. And that was what Renzi had tried to do by, you know, taking the EU guidelines and changing the Italian constitution according to these provisions. And the Italian population rejected it 60 to 40%. And now Renzi is out. So this is, you know, a situation which, you know, is reflective of the deep-rooted rejection of the population of these policies. Now, what was the reaction of the European Central Bank to the no to the referendum and the Italian banking crisis, which naturally erupted or threatened to erupt fully, because, you know, if these requirements for the EU could not be fulfilled, then naturally, you know, the conflict between the national interest of Italy and the EU erupted even more. So what did the EZB do? Draghi announced that he would continue quantitative easing forever. He said, you know, at least until the end of 2017, I will reduce the quantitative easing from 80 to 60 billion per month. I mean, it's still a lot of money, but I may increase it even higher than 80 if required, and even it could go beyond 2017, which means that the total amount of EZB state bond buying is now 2.3 trillion euros. which is quite amazing. Now, what that amounts to is, that you start to finance the deficit of states by printing with the printing press. And that is exactly what the Reichsbank in Germany did in 1923. And people should not be fooled by the so-called low inflation rate, because, the Reichsbank financed the war debt and the reparations of Germany for 4 years before it became visible. But then in spring 1923 it erupted very, very quickly. Now, this measure by the EZB is so outrageous that even the neoliberal house organ of Frankfurt, the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, had an amazing editorial a week ago where they basically said the EZB broke all rules of Maastricht and all EU treaties. They have now become a debt union, a union of people where everybody has to take care of the losses of the other one, which was in the rules that this should never happen. It is a violation of the non-assistance clause, and it is basically making the savers poorer, the speculators richer. And then the editorial says, if the politicians denounce this reaction of the people against this policy as populism, they are in a complete state of denial. And that is absolutely true, because, there is such a thing as natural law. If you violate the living condition of people for a very long period of time, they may take it for a while, because, people are, sometimes in habits, and sometimes, they trust the government and they think it will not be so bad. But if it takes away the basis for existence of ever larger amounts of people, then eventually, you see exactly what you are seeing right now. Now, what you have is a complete state of denial of reality on the side of those people who say this is just populism, demagogues who all, hype up the people. And it is interesting that the neoliberal, neocon press, both in the English-speaking world and in Germany, choose a word as the word of the year. In English it's post-truth, and in German it's post-faktisch, which means the same thing, which is the idea that people no longer react to the facts, but they only react to feelings, and that, the facts are that everybody is better off, but people have the feeling that people are worse off, and therefore they only listen to their feelings, and therefore, it's an effort. It's really a manipulation. So whenever you read this word post-truth or post-faktisch, it's one of these, I'm sure it's one of these creations of psychological think tanks to manipulate the people. Because, I would say that what is at work is not post-faktisch or post-truth. What is at work is natural law. That there is a justice in the universe and in the political order which you cannot violate for a very long period of time. You cannot make the rich, the one upper 0.1% and upper 1% people, or 80 people now own as much wealth as 3.5 billion people. Now, does that make sense? No, it doesn't make sense. And you cannot have a world where this is going on. So, the rules of the European Union, the EZB, all have been broken completely, and there is such a legal principle which is called pacta sunt servanda. Treaties must be served. If you don't have that legal principle, there is no order in the world anymore. If you can make a pact, a treaty, and then everybody turns around and violates it, you have chaos. And it is really the EU dismantling the EU It's not the people. It's this unjust system which is doing that. Now, so it is no surprise that this rebellion against the system is taking place. And if you take this word globalization, another word for the same thing is Anglo-American Empire. Now, Anglo-American Empire is really the power of Wall Street and the city of London, and they up to recently said we are in an unipolar world. We set the rules. This was the purpose of TTIP for Europe, the transatlantic trade relation, and for TPP for the trans-Pacific trade relations. And Obama had an interview, an article in the Washington Post several months ago, where he said the purpose of TPP is that the United States sets the rules in Asia, not China. I mean, he said it as explicit as that. And naturally, the world is no longer an unipolar world. It's an illusion. But one has to really look at the EU from that standpoint. That since the Maastricht Treaty, and I just want to remind people that the unification of Germany, people said they have to pay a price, they have to give up the D-Mark for the euro. It was especially Thatcher, Mitterrand and Bush who had insisted that the price for German unification would be the euro. And, it was an attempt to make the European Union the pro-consul of this Anglo-American empire, the regional stakeholder, so to speak, of this power of Wall Street and London. Now, this is why, people have wondered maybe, why did nobody do anything to correct the casino economy after the crash of the systemic crisis of 2008? One could have thought this was almost a systemic crisis. People were completely freaked out that this would lead to a meltdown, this terrible chaos, but then they decided to do the same thing on and on. Instead, they made it worse. What did they do? They implemented quantitative easing, money printing, negative interest rate. If you now have money in most countries, you bring it to the bank and you have to pay. No more interest, but you have to pay. Even industry have to pay when they get a loan. That doesn't make any sense. And then they even talk about helicopter money. That was the old idea of Ben Bernanke, that if he said, before we allow a banking crisis to take down the system, we will fly with helicopters over the cities and just throw notes out, to create as much liquidity as required. And actually, now the last phase of it is what the EZB is doing with state financing by the printing press. Now that cannot go on, but this is the reason why I'm saying that this revolt will go on until the causes of the injustice are remedied, and we will have again governments which take care of the common good of the people. Now it is almost that people in Europe, when you say that the purpose of government is to be for the common good of the people, they look at you and say, what? I have never heard such a thing. Because politicians are there because they want to have a position, privileges, they want to be re-elected, but to be for the common good of the people, that's almost an exotic idea. So, unfortunately, this unipolar world attempt also naturally had a military security component, and that was the cause for the eastward expansion of the EU and NATO. That is why NATO is continuously moving towards the borders of Russia, the EU in the same way. This is the whole reason for the Ukraine crisis, because the EU wanted to incorporate Ukraine into the EU, which would have had a military component, and that was why all of this Ukraine crisis happened, and not Putin annexing the Crimea, what is the official story. But the encirclement of Russia, of China, the building of a global ballistic missile system, which was read correctly by the Russian and the Chinese military as an attempt to prepare a first strike capability with the ability to take out the second strike capability of these countries, where then naturally both Russia and China said we cannot allow that, and we will have to take adequate countermeasures. And that was the road which we were on with Obama. This is why many military experts said that we are in a crisis more dangerous than the height of the Cold War. And if you remember, the height of the Cold War was the Cuba Missile Crisis, which was, bringing us to the brink of extinction. And if people say this was more dangerous, or really still is more dangerous, people should take it serious. And with this unipolar world was the idea of regime change against every country which would not submit. This was the reason for the war against Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Ukraine, color revolution, and so this obviously, if you look now at the result of this, it's a string of one policy failure after the other. Because, for example, Chess Freeman, who is a former US ambassador to Saudi Arabia and other countries, he made a very interesting speech about a year ago in Washington where he said, even if you look at this policy of foreign intervention and wars from a narrow American standpoint, they have not served US interest. US interest, US reputation in the world has become worse. The whole creation of this terrorism is the result of it. The world has become much more insecure as a consequence. Okay, now the really good news is to come to the second dynamic I was describing. And that is that the new paradigm of a completely new set of international relations is already fully underway. As I said, it involves the greater part of mankind. When President Xi Jinping announced the new Silk Road One Belt, One Road policy initiative in September in Kazakhstan, we from the Schiller Institute were naturally extremely happy, because those of you who know us for a longer period of time, and Tom referenced it already, this is what we have been working for the last quarter of a century, because when the wall came down in Berlin, we were prepared for that, because Mr. LaRouche had already predicted in 1984 that the Soviet Union and the Comecon would collapse if they would stick to their then existing military policy. So in 1988, Mr. LaRouche and I gave a press conference in Berlin where he basically said, Germany will be soon unified, and then we should develop the east of the Comecon countries with modern technologies, starting with Poland. And then naturally, when the wall came down, we had within a week, I wrote a leaflet, continue Germany. I said, continue beloved Germany, and then I said what Germany should do, because we knew this would happen. And when the Soviet Union, and then we proposed the integration of East and Western Europe through infrastructure corridors. And when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, we said, okay, we extend this European program to become a Eurasian program. Let's connect the population and industry centers of Europe with those of Asia through development corridors, and we called it the Eurasian Land Bridge, the new Silk Road. And we made hundreds of conferences and seminars all over the world for this perspective. And in 1996, China organized a big conference in Beijing, which they called, on our suggestion, which they called the regions along the Eurasian Land Bridge and their development. And at that point, China already wanted to have the Eurasian Land Bridge as the long-term strategic perspective of China. Then the Asia crisis came in '97 and the whole effort was interrupted. But in 2013, President Xi Jinping put the new Silk Road on the agenda, and ever since this is really developing to be the largest infrastructure and development program in history ever. It is an unbelievable dynamic, and just because you don't read about it much in the media, it doesn't mean it's not happening. It is very much happening, and what is the basis of it is that China is exporting the Chinese economic model to all other participating countries. And the Chinese economic model, for anybody who was in China, is unbelievable. It is the German economic miracle was also very remarkable, but the Chinese economic miracle is probably even more remarkable because it's a much larger country involving 1.4 billion people, and they just recently published a white book that China has lifted 700 million people out of extreme poverty, and until the year 2020 they want to lift the remaining 5.7% of poor people out of this condition and have no more poverty in China. So China, by following the reforms of Deng Xiaoping and completely reversing the course of the Cultural Revolution, they repeated in 30 years economic development what the industrialized countries were needing for 200 years or 150 years. And if you have been in Shanghai or Beijing or Chongqing or Chengdu or any other large city in China, it is really amazing what level of development China has accomplished. And now they are exporting that by making the new Silk Road the common motor for development. They are building fast train systems, infrastructure corridors, energy production and distribution. They are building science cities with developing countries. Xi Jinping was just in Ecuador, where they are building a science city, where President Correa, the president of Ecuador, said that China and Ecuador are united in their wish to be at the frontier of science, to have the most advanced technologies. Ecuador is still a poor developing country, but they are now inspired by China to leapfrog, to not just repeat what the industrial countries were, doing in 200 years, but to leapfrog to the top. And China is helping them. And this has completely changed the dynamic in the whole world. This involves now more and more regions of the world. The original route goes from China to Central Asia to Europe, but now it is already spreading to the ASEAN countries, to the 16+1 East and Central European countries, who all are now happy that China comes and invests in infrastructure, in a railway between Serbia and Hungary and Poland. Even Poland, Nazarbayev, the president of Kazakhstan, was recently at a conference in Poland where he said that they are now building a development corridor from Kazakhstan to Poland through Russia, and that he personally wants to help to overcome the tensions between Poland and Russia. So what we are looking at is not just economic development, but this is the basis of a peace order for the 21st century, because if you have common development for everybody, then you also tend to eliminate the causes for war. It also involves more and more Latin American countries. At the recent trip of Xi Jinping to Latin America, he visited Ecuador, Peru, and Chile. And China is now building a transcontinental railway from Brazil to Peru, several tunnels between Chile and Argentina, and a new channel in Nicaragua, and such things. Now, the process of economic integration is going extremely rapidly. At the Vladivostok Economic Forum at the beginning of September, you had not only the integration of the Eurasian Economic Union with the One Belt, One Road policy, also Japanese Prime Minister Abe was there, and Japan is now massively investing in the Far East in Russia. Then this integration was continued at the G20 summit in Hangzhou, where China said the new economic philosophy will be innovation. Only through innovation will we get out of the economic crisis. And it was continued at the ASEAN conference in Laos, at the BRICS conference in Goa in India in October, and at the recent APEC meeting in Lima in November. Now, China and the other Asian countries and the BRICS countries have also constructed a lot of new banks. The AIIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the New Development Bank, the Silk Road Fund, the Maritime Silk Road Fund, and other banks like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Bank, the SAARC Bank of the South Asian countries. And all of these banks are built on a completely different principle than the IMF, the World Bank, because they are only there for infrastructure and other investment in the real economy, not for speculation. And this is very, very important, because this is almost like the lifeboat for the sinking Titanic of the collapsing transatlantic financial system, because it is a model of how banking should be. You don't need speculation, you don't need derivatives, you don't need all of this. But what these banks deliberately intended to do, to take care of the deficit of infrastructure investment on the side of the IMF and the World Bank for the last decades. I mean, the condition of the third world, of Africa, of many Asian and Latin American countries is not natural. You know, if the IMF and the World Bank would have done in the last 50 years what now these new Asian banks are doing, you wouldn't have poverty, you would have blooming gardens. You know, I mean, there is no need to have such an amount of destruction like we are seeing it in many parts of the world, except that it was the intention to keep these countries down and to introduce this whole idiotic idea of limits to growth and resource exploitation and all of this. Anyway, so these new banks are there, and you can see with Trump's announcement that he will build a 1 trillion infrastructure program, that the world could really grow together. You know, the chairwoman from the Foreign Policy State Council of China, Madame Fu Ying, just recently was in New York at a speech, and she gave a speech. She said, the infrastructure program of Trump can be the bridge to the One Belt, One Road. And that is exactly what, you know, when we, the Schiller Institute, in 2014, published a study, which you can see at the book table, The New Silk Road Becomes the World Land Bridge, where we had one chapter, which we added later on, to basically build US infrastructure in connection with the rest of the world development. And, you know, at a recent intervention in New York, one of our colleagues intervened in a presentation with Henry Kissinger, and he asked, you know, Mr. Kissinger, what do you think about the LaRouche proposal and the Chinese proposal to have the United States joining the One Belt, One Road? I mean, you should know that the relation between my husband and Kissinger over the decades was not the most amiable one, because we criticized many of Kissinger's policies. So it was quite amazing that he said, yes, the One Belt, One Road is very important for the world. And Kissinger is meeting with Trump now regularly, and obviously, you know, Kissinger, if you remember, was the one who in 1971 came to China to prepare the visit of Nixon. I mean, it was just when I was in China, Kissinger came, and this was a big thing, because up to that point, the Chinese outlook was that the United States is a paper tiger which can be easily defeated in the conflict with Vietnam and so forth. So to invite Kissinger and then Nixon was a real dramatic change in Chinese policy. So it is quite interesting that Kissinger now would say this. Now, obviously, infrastructure in the United States is not the only problem, because you need to stop the casino economy, the Wall Street excesses, which have led to this crisis. But Trump, in the election campaign, promised repeatedly that he would introduce Glass-Steagall, the banking separation law of Franklin D. Roosevelt. Now, we have to see if he will do it. I mean, there is now a lot of expectation. Some of the progressive Democrats have said that they will collaborate with Trump on this point, but we have to see. And we are, again, not looking at it passively, but we are taking an active attitude. We are talking with congressmen, with senators. We bring activists to meet them from the different states. But the purpose is that we need the full package of solutions which have been proposed by Mr. LaRouche, who designed the 4 fundamental laws which are necessary to remedy this crisis. And the first of these laws is the implementation of Glass-Steagall. You have to do exactly what Roosevelt did in 1933. You separate the banks. The commercial banks will get protected. The investment banks must take care of themselves without taxpayer money, without quantitative easing, and if they then have red figures in their books, they have to close down. I mean, that's simply what should happen, and we really don't need them. But that is only the first step, that you go then to national banking. This is not some socialist or communist idea, but it is what the first Secretary of Treasury of the United States, Alexander Hamilton, did, who really united the United States by taking the debt from the War of Independence, by unifying the state debt, making it into a federal debt, and then implement a taxation to stabilize this debt and use that as a basis for new credits for investment. Now that model has been repeated. It was done by John Quincy Adams, who created the second national bank, the second bank of the United States from 1816 to 1836. And this first and second US banks were both used only for investment in the real economy. And it was implemented again in principle by Lincoln, who was advised by Henry C. Carey. And he went then to the greenback system, U.S. notes. This system, by the way, where Lincoln was advised by Henry C. Carey, was also the reason why Germany turned, in the time of Bismarck, in a few years from a feudal country into an industrialized country. Now this is very important, because if you read all the biographies of Bismarck, you will not find one reference to Henry C. Carey. And you will not find a reference to Wilhelm von Kardorff, who anybody who wants to study this period more in depth, I can only advise to read a little booklet called Against the Stream, where Wilhelm von Kardorff, who was the head of the German Industry Association at the time of Bismarck, wrote all the reasons for the physical economy, which was what advised Bismarck then to stop free trade and go to a protectionist system like what Lincoln did in the United States. It was the same system which was implemented by Franklin D. Roosevelt, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which gave the credit for the New Deal, all the infrastructure projects, the Tennessee Valley Authority project, the electrification, the CCC program, by putting use in real education and job programs. And that was the way how the United States was led by Roosevelt out of the Depression and became the most industrialized, developed countries by the end of the Second World War. And it was that same approach which the German Kreditanstalt für Wiederaufbau, the credit bank for reconstruction, used to make the German economic miracle in the post-war period, because the KfR, the credit bank, was based on the Reconstruction Finance Corporation by Roosevelt. Now, the purpose of this credit system is not just simple investment, but the purpose must be to increase the productivity of the production process through the injection of science and technology, and to go to higher forms of energy flux density associated with these higher technologies. It must also be capital investment intensive. But the fourth point of Mr. LaRouche is really almost the most important, because if you look at the effects of globalization of the last 50 decades, since approximately the death of Kennedy, because of a lot of wrong economic principles, cheap labor, buy cheap, sell expensive, control the trade, you know, the actual productive powers of the transatlantic world, and in the beginning phase even of China, which in the beginning was a cheap labor country, has destroyed much of the productive capacity needed to maintain the existing world population of 7 billion people. So this is why Africa is poor, this is why the Middle East is poor, why many other countries are still poor. So you need to have an injection in science and technology to increase the productivity of the entire capacities worldwide. And the only efficient way, the necessary way, must be a crash program for the development of thermonuclear fusion power and space technology. Because these are the areas where you can say with absolute scientific certainty will lead to the desired increase in productivity. Now, the reason for fusion power is very obvious, because once you have thermonuclear fusion, you will have, through the incredibly large heat or high heat associated with fusion, 100 million degrees, a side technology of that is called fusion torch. And with that you can take oil waste and basically separate it into new isotopes and create new raw materials. So you will have already with heavy deuterium and tritium, which is the fuel for the first generation of fusion power, you will have energy security for all of mankind, and you will have raw material security. And that is naturally an extremely important goal to reach. And you know, this the main reason why we don't have fusion power yet is because if you look at the, and we did a thorough investigation of that, if you look at the investment in fusion in Europe and in the United States, it was always below the threshold to make a breakthrough, just to keep the technology research going. But you know, if you don't make a crash program, you will not reach it. And China, what a surprise, is now the only country which is increasing its investment in fusion research, and they got a major breakthrough just recently in the EAST program, the Experimental Advanced Superconductivity Tokamak, which is in the Institute for Plasma Physics in Hefei, where they were able to stabilize a hydrogen plasma for 100 seconds and reach a temperature within the plasma of 50 million degrees, which is about half what is needed to keep the fusion process going on the basis of deuterium and tritium. Now, China has a very ambitious program. They want to have the first test fusion reactor operating by 2025, and they want then to have 200 megawatt electricity produced, then move immediately to upgrade that into a operating reactor with 1 gigawatt production. But China is already looking at the second generation fusion power while they are building the first basis for the first generation, and that is immediately associated with the Chinese space program, where they will have next year, 2017, the Chang'e 5 mission to the moon, where they will land a vehicle, a rover, on the moon to take probes from the surface from the moon, bring it back to Earth, and then have 1 year later, in 2018, the Chang'e 4 mission, which is supposed to land for the first time a space vehicle on the far side of the moon. Now this is very, very exciting because the far side of the moon is not disturbed by lots of the radiation coming from the Earth or from the Sun or other radiations, and therefore you can on the one side use it to put up telescopes, which you cannot use on the light side of the moon, and this will allow you to have much, much deeper perspectives into the solar system and the galaxy and beyond. But you can also start looking at mining of helium-3 from the far side of the moon. Helium-3 is an isotope of helium, and it is a perfect fuel for the second generation of thermonuclear fusion power, because it is basically allowing you to then take electricity for the first time directly from the physical process and not go through turbines and usual production of energy production. Now helium-3, you only have 15 tons on the Earth, but you have 1 to 5 million tons on the moon. And you need, for practically indefinite energy security on the Earth, you need about 100 tons. So, I really think it's important that people understand that we are on the verge of a completely new way of organizing affairs on the Earth. And, it really means, it has everything to do with the long-term ability of mankind to survive as a species. Now, one philosophy goes along with that, apart from what Mr. LaRouche has developed as the correlation of energy flux density with relative population density. In other words, that there is a correlation between the energy density you use in the production process and the number of people you can maintain. Which is why the idea of decarbonization of the world economy is really genocide, because if you eliminate coal, gas, fossil fuels, nuclear energy, and only go to alternative energies, like what some people are proposing these days, the population potential you can maintain with that is about 1 billion or less, and that should be very, very clear. Now, the German space researcher and rocket scientist Kraft Erike, who is very, very important, and we are planning to have 2 big conferences next year at his 100th anniversary of his death day, because he had a vision about not only birthday, sorry, he had a vision about why man must go to space. Well, first of all, he had a very fascinating idea of the evolution of life on the planet. He had the idea that life developed out of the oceans through photosynthesis on the land. Then higher species developed where each species had what we would call nowadays a higher energy flux density in their metabolism, and eventually men appeared. And then, men first settled at rivers and oceans, then men, because man is the one species which has the creative ability to come up with new technologies all the time, brought infrastructure inland, building roads, building waterways, channels, building trains, and that way started to conquer more and more of the landlocked areas of the continents. If you look at this World Land Bridge report, or this World Land Bridge idea, which is the conception that you will bring infrastructure development to all landlocked areas in all continents. So with that, the infrastructure development of the planet is completed, at least in principle. And then, naturally, the next level of the next stage of infrastructure development is the colonization of space, near space, going to the moon, industrializing the moon, and take the moon as the starting point for space travel to other heavenly bodies like the Mars and other planets. So Kraft-Ericke developed something which he called the 3 fundamental laws of astronautics, which I want to read to you because I really think they are extremely important. First, the first law says, nobody and nothing under natural law of the universe is imposing limitations on man outside man himself, which is, again, a fundamental idea which used to be normal in European humanism, that man is infinitely perfectible, and nothing blocks the perfection of man other than man himself. I think this is an idea which has been almost lost nowadays because people have been adjusted that everything is limited, everything is known already. You can't really make fundamental breakthroughs anymore, but not so. And the second law Kraft-Ericke developed is not only the Earth, but the entire solar system and as much of the universe as is accessible according to natural laws are the legitimate field of his activity. Now that is an equally beautiful idea that the universe is our garden. It's not just the Earth, but the entire solar system and whatever else we can reach. And then the third law, he says, by extending himself in the universe, man fulfills his destiny as an element of life, gifted with the power of reason and the wisdom of the moral law that is inside him. Now, that is a very beautiful idea also, that it's our destiny to fill the universe, not only that we have to plant the earth, as it is said in the Bible, that man has to subdue the earth and multiply, but we have to extend ourselves in the universe because we have the gift of power of reason and we have a moral law inside ourselves. That also has been forgotten, that people have an inner voice, something like a conscience, and that conscience can be a guideline. I mean, many people have forgotten that such a thing exists. Now, obviously, the significance of this philosophical and naturally also practical dimension of space is that we as a human species are not earthbound, that we are capable of leaving the earth, and you can already see the next platforms. If you Mr. LaRouche defined this notion as an economic platform to specify that the most advanced technology at each level defines a platform. So you had the platform of hunters and gatherers, you had the platform of agriculture, you had the platform of the steam engine, the platform of, let's say, air travel, And the first platform of space activity is the ability of man to even leave the surface of the Earth. I mean, it's not self-evident that man would get the idea that you don't have to stay on the Earth, but that you can develop spaceships and get into an orbit, you know, which is about the platform we are now at with the ISS, with the first moon landings. And then the second platform will be space travel, where you use installations like on the moon, you industrialize the moon, you create moon villages, to then travel from one heavenly body to the next, like from the moon to the Mars. And then the third level, obviously, will be that you travel, that you produce in space that what you need. In other words, you don't take with a spaceship food and fuel and other things, but that you take the resources existing in space to produce, which will be necessary if you have long-term space travel with spaceships fueled by fusion energy, for example, which makes it much faster. But you can already see that that will be the next step level. Now, Kraft-Ehricke called this process of space travel the extraterrestrial imperative of man. Well, this is very beautiful because it implies that once man becomes a spacefaring species, that you have to be rational. You know, you cannot go to the moon and have a fit. It's not good for your health if you do that. So it requires that man becomes adult and that man continuously develops new horizons. And I think that's a very beautiful idea. It is interesting that despite all the greeny ideology which has been infested the minds of people in the last 40 years, that ESA, European Space Agency, just had a conference where the ministers of the 22 participating countries, in this context, they made a poll. And it turned out that 88% of all the people polled were in favor of space exploration, which means they're culturally optimistic concerning the idea of space. And even more, 96% thought that space research gives mankind more chances than anything you can do on Earth. Like space medicine is the most advanced and things like that. So this is very beautiful because when we are talking about the new paradigm, we want all people to think like astronauts, cosmonauts, and taikonauts, because all of them, when they come back from the ISS and give press conferences, they all say, you know, when you look at the Earth from space, you have a completely different perspective. You see one humanity sitting on a small, fragile blue planet. You don't see borders, you don't see wars, but you see the one mankind. And that is the view which we have to induce people to have if the new paradigm is supposed to succeed. It is what Xi Jinping calls all the time a community of destiny for the future of mankind. Because we are a community of destiny, because in former times civilizations could go under and others would rise and they wouldn't even know about it. But because of nuclear weapons, the speed of air travel, the possibility of epidemics to travel around the world, many other factors, we are sitting so much in one boat that you cannot have one part of the world go under and another one prosper, but we have to really make the jump away from geopolitics to the idea that we are one humanity. And that has to start in the head. I mean, there will be still legitimate room for nations, for languages, for culture, but you have to start in your mind with the one humanity, and there must be never again an interest of one nation or a group of nations which is in violation to the interest of mankind as a whole. And either we make that jump or we will not exist. And I think with the win-win perspective of China and the new Silk Road, we have a realistic possibility of making exactly that jump. Now, we also have to re-establish international people's law, which has been completely trampled upon with the neocons, which is essentially what's in the UN Charter, which means a total respect for the sovereignty of countries, non-interference in the internal affairs, respect for the different social model. All of this democracy, human rights was only a pretext anyway, and it should be put in the garbage bin, because you don't have democracy. If the Wall Street can buy a senator for $5 billion, you don't have democracy, you know. And I could say a lot about European parties as well. So we have to have a new paradigm. And this new paradigm was already envisioned by Nicolaus of Cues in the 15th century, where he said the only reason why different cultures can communicate with each other is because all of them produce wise people, wise men, wise women, and artists, musicians, scientists who all speak a universal language. Like, you can have musicians from all nations playing in one orchestra, totally understanding themselves, because music is a universal language. A scientist who makes a discovery in one country can replicate that discovery in another country, because it's a universal language. So we have to have a communication on that level of scientists, of artists, and then there will be no problem among the cultures, and we will have what Nicolaus of Cues also envisioned, a harmony in the universe, because all microcosms develop into a harmonious macrocosm. And that is also the idea of Confucius, who had exactly that same idea of a harmonious development. If all develop their potentialities, you will have harmony at large. And it will also mean the fulfillment of Leibniz's vision that China and Europe reach hands and develop the rest of the world between them and beyond them. And this development will be not just a static development, but like a contrapunctal fugue, where the development of each reaches into the other and is leading to a beautiful totality. Now, practically, that means we have to have a Marshall Plan Silk Road program for the reconstruction of the Middle East. Now that the war has a hope to come to an end in Syria, we must put the reconstruction of all of these countries on the table. Xi Jinping already said, you know, the Silk Road can be extended into the Middle East. General Flynn already in 2015 talked about the Marshall Plan for the Middle East. The Chinese don't like so much the word Marshall Plan because it has this Cold War connotation. So let's just call it a New Silk Road Marshall Plan without Cold War connotation or whatever. Then naturally we also need the participation on that from all the neighbor countries, Russia, China, India, Iran, Italy, France, Germany, Denmark, the United States, should all work together to rebuild this region. I mean, we let it happen that this incredible destruction occurred. I mean, if we didn't cause it, you know, we didn't do anything to stop it. So we have a moral obligation to reconstruct this area. And the same goes for the development of Africa. Xi Jinping at the G20 meeting already said that Africa will be instrumental in helping to industrialize Africa. And we had a meeting of African nations or representatives in Hamburg just 2 weeks ago, where the mood was completely shifted. Different African speakers said, yeah, there's a new paradigm working in the world. China, India, Japan, they're all coming to Africa and invest in real things, in bridges, in railways, and the Europeans, they will be sidelined because they only come with speeches, sermons, Sunday sermons, with democracy demands, with obligations to pay debt, but they will be left behind if they don't change. They should come and participate, you know, but that needs our intervention to accomplish exactly that. So these changes are the key challenge for the next couple of months, because Trump has promised he would get these changes underway in the next first 100 days of his presidency. And we all have to participate in building a completely new set of relations among nations. We have to overcome geopolitics and build exactly this common community for the future of mankind. We have to realize this program, the new Silk Road, must become the world land bridge. And I only want to add one thing which is very, very important, that together with this economic development, we must have a new renaissance of classical culture. Because with globalization, you not only had all of these things I described, but you also had a terrible cultural degeneracy. And, you know, if you look at the youth culture of today in particular, it is ugly, it is sometimes even satanic, and you don't need to go to black Gothic, you can stay with Madonna to come to the satanic. And that is obviously the complete destruction of creativity. And, you know, given the fact that Trump has now appointed several people who are known to be hardliners against drugs, like, for example, Senator Sessions, who will be, I think, the Attorney General, and others, you know, the drug epidemic, which is one of the causes for the suicide rate in the United States, and the fact that during the time NATO was in Afghanistan, the drug production there increased by 40 times. Obviously, you know, with the permission of the people who were there, because otherwise it wouldn't have happened. This is regarded by Russia, for example, as one of the largest threats to the national security, because 100,000 people per year are affected and many of them die. And therefore this drug epidemic must be overcome, but we have to have a beautiful culture and revive the classical traditions of each nation. And we have heard from Feride one very beautiful example that, you know, I'm absolutely certain that when people would know the beautiful examples of the other cultures, they would fall in love, and all xenophobia would vanish, and all hatred against foreigners would disappear, because when they see the best expressions of the culture, of the high point of the other culture, they would realize that, you know, the universe is all the more beautiful because there are so many cultures and so many nations. And the world would be much poorer and much more boring if there would be only one unipolar culture. So we should add to this perspective the idea of a dialogue of cultures on the highest level. And I think we should be very happy, because I think that if this all goes in the right direction, which is in large part our subjective obligation to help, and I'm asking all of you to be not passive observers, but to join with the Schiller Institute to help to implement these visions and these ideas, because then we will be very lucky that we in our lifetime can live the new paradigm. And the new paradigm will be the first time that man's dignity will be realized. And I think that is a very, very important mission we should all adopt.